Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Jonathan?
Hello.
If you don't get a general election, will you be calling on NHS staff to go out in a general strike like your colleague there?
No, that is not our position as a party. And look, we do support NHS staff when they go on strike. There's a thing going on in the NHS at the moment where facilities staff, catering staff, porters are trying to be transferred into privatised, wholly owned subsidiary companies. I support those unions taking that action.
Should she have called for a general strike like the one in 1926?
Well, I wouldn't have done it, but she's not. But Laura is not a member of the Labour front bench.
She's a member of Parliament for Labour.
She's a member of Parliament. Well, members of Parliament say things all the time, but it's not the policy of the Labour Party to call for a general strike.
So what was Richard Bergen doing? He was sitting here yesterday, but the Shadow Justice Secretary jumped up and gave that a standing ovation. He's a member of the Shadow Cabinet.
I suspect he was giving her an ovation for everything she was saying in the speech, but I wasn't actually at that event.
No,
so I've got no
idea.
He
jumped up when she said we should
go
on strike, we should call a strike. Is that helpful?
I mean, it's not the position of Labour, but we do support workers when they ballot and when they choose to take industrial action, like I am doing in the NHS over this move to this, what I think is essentially a backdoor privatisation. So we do support workers when they take strikes, but there's the procedures and the rules and the regulations around balloting and strike action is very cumbersome. We don't support a general strike. It's unlikely to happen. It's not going to happen anyway. The way in which we change a government and the way in which we change society is getting a Labour Party elected in a general election.
Sure, but is it actually? Does it give a sense of frustration on behalf of Laura there? Because you can't actually trigger a general election. It's not in your gift to do so in order, as you say, to have that vote to the people.
Well, I suspect Laura is expressing the frustration that we all have as Labour MPs when we go to our constituency surgeries and we see people coming to us in the most devastating and dire of circumstances because of decisions that this Tory government is making. We're talking today about the state of the economy. We've had more data out yesterday about life expectancy and health inequalities. Austerity is having such a terrible impact on people's lives.
Are you raising the spectre of a general election that you can't make happen? I mean, it's true you say the government will collapse itself if Brexit deal is voted down in Parliament, and then we'll have an election. How?
Well, I mean, the parliamentary arithmetic is very precarious at the moment.
So you can't, can you?
Well, you don't know that, because Theresa May cannot get, or we all suspect she will not be able to get, any Chequers agreement through Parliament. And at that point, what does she do? What is the point of the Tory government at that point? Right. Do the DUP continue to prop her up? You know, there are lots of questions here. There are
lots of questions, and at the moment we can't have any answers from Labour in terms of how you would actually get that general election. They're hamstrung, though, aren't they?
But you're sort of you're kind of focusing on the procedures of Parliament. We've got to push for a general election because politically that's the correct thing to do.
But how do they make it happen?
Look, it's very hard for the Labour Party to force a general election, but all I would say is politics has been so capricious over the last few years. You know, do you ever think we would have been in a time where we had a Scottish referendum, we then had another general election, we then had an EU referendum, we then had another snap general election?
All right, you don't want any more elections, do you?
Brenda from Bristol's going to get on the line. But all I can say is you can never say never. And as Jonathan says, because the maths is so difficult for Theresa May, and the Tory party is also very, very febrile, politics is in a very febrile state. So it is difficult for the Labour Party to force one, but never say never with the circumstances right now. I
mean, Emily Thornberry said, we're going to demand a general election. Well, Labour can demand all it likes, but it doesn't mean, Ash, that it's going to go ahead.
Absolutely, and I agree with you that the mood of politics is in a very febrile state, but because of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, we don't really have a kind of constitutional mechanism which can be as responsive as I think many people in the electorate would like, which is why with the calling for a general strike, and I understand what you're saying about that not being Labour Party policy, but the Labour Party has changed. It's not just this top-down bureaucracy anymore, it's a social movement. So I think what Laura is calling for is an active electorate, a participative electorate, using the tools they have available to them to exert pressure on the government. It's not just
How did a general strike in 1926 help workers?
I don't think the one in 1926 is something which we should take too much inspiration from, but I think what that showed is that union activities are very good at holding a government to account.
Because it led to legislation that, of course, banned exactly what happened at that time. So was that fruitful?
I think that it was in some ways, it wasn't in others. It exacted a very, as you are right to point out, very draconian response from the state, but it also led to, I think, some of the most successful union movements in history in the subsequent decades.
Did it lead to increased wages for the workers that went on strike?
Not directly, no, but this would be a different general strike. So it's exerting pressure on the government for a political demand, not necessarily an economic one.
I just say, listen, I think we have a really radical agenda here put forward by the Labour Party. John McDonnell's talk about, giving workers more of a voice. We as a party will self-harm our chances of ever getting elected if we start giving a signal to the public that we're going to start authorising kind of strikes and Britain sort of grinding to a halt. We have a real shot at being taken seriously. I think John McDonnell particularly has done great work. That is why all this talk about strikes and general action, that is just a disastrous strategy for the Labour Party to pursue.
Let's talk about something else.
Yes.
Does the Labour leadership and does Labour as a whole and as a party have a problem with women in the top positions?
No.
Well, why did they ditch those plans to have a female joint deputy leader?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily the constitutional post in the party. It's what the senior, it's the roles that women are in. We've got a female Shadow Foreign Secretary, a female Shadow Home Secretary.
You haven't had a female leader.
No, and I've voted for female candidates in the past. I think
and you've got the chance to have a female joint deputy leader.
And I first got to know Aisha when we used to help Harriet Harman, who was a brilliant deputy leader and a brilliant acting leader as well. So I agree. The Labour Party does need to get itself a female leader. But Jeremy Corbyn's going to be around for a long time, but in the future, yeah.
Let's have a look at this tweet from Jess Phillips, Labour MP. If the desire to have a woman deputy is about Jeremy Corbyn, not women in the country or even the premise of women's representation, then you've gone wrong. We need women at the top for the sake of difference, for the sake of ideas, for the reminder we exist not to flatter their egos. Who's she talking about, Aisha?
I think she's talking about this leadership. Look, I sort of disagree with Jonathan. I think we do have a problem with women leadership. Our national leadership is run by men. All our metro mayors are men. We have more men in sort of as council leaders. Look at our special advisors. We definitely have a structural problem, and that's why I really hope that this proposition is revisited, because in fact, I launched a book with this amazing woman called Nan Sloan called Women in the Room. The Labour Party has always prided itself on being the party of women and equality, but when it comes to leadership, we have got to do better.
So I think one of the things that we've seen this year is that Women's Conference was empowered, so it could present policy ideas which would then be voted on in main conference. I think that's a tremendous step forward. I don't necessarily think there is this dearth of women at the top. There's only a dearth of women in the top, and I think in these kind of symbolic roles which thing is that like this, I think that Diane Abbott is a leader. I think that Dawn Butler is a leader. I also think that very exciting figures like Laura Pidcock, Marsha de Cordova, they're leaders of the grassroots.
But were you disappointed that they ditched that plan? I mean, Tom Watson, the deputy leader, said, I'm really disappointed with it because I think it will put the cause of gender representation back in the Labour Party, as in backwards. But he said the debate will continue, and he implied it was the hard left that had a problem.
As a feminist, what I don't want are these cosmetic gestures towards representation. I want our voices heard at the level of policy, and I think that is something that's happening.
I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, I gave the impression that perhaps I'm disagreeing with Aisha. I'm not sort of really. I think we agree more than perhaps I gave the impression. I mean, for what it's worth, I would have supported that motion. I mean, I'm not a voting delegate, but I would have supported the motion for a female deputy leader. I mean, and you say that it was the hard left. It's certainly true that...
No, I didn't. It was Tom Watson,
Oh, sorry,
actually.
beg your pardon. But it's certainly true that some of the campaign groups who feel that they are very sort of, here to be supportive of the leadership, were calling on delegates to withdraw that, having supported this as a proposal a few weeks ago. But I'm sure things must have been going on behind the scenes. But anyway, I suspect we're going to still consider it, debate it, look at it, and hope it might come back.
The optics of it look bad. It looks like it was done for sort of political power play reasons rather than the advancement of gender equality, and that's what the Labour Party should be focused on.
All right, well, let's hear what some of the delegates have been saying to Chris Mason ahead of Jeremy Corbyn's speech.
So here we go, just a few minutes to go until Jeremy Corbyn gives his big speech. Big queue to get in. I must admit there's a slightly bigger queue to use the toilet down there because people want to make sure they've been before the speech, before they're in the hall. I'm not going to go waving the microphone around in there, so to speak. But let's have a quick word with Natasha, Labour activist from Dudley. What are you looking forward to hearing?
I want to hear more progress on our last manifesto. I thought the last manifesto was absolutely fantastic. It was the best manifesto that I think the Labour have produced since the Clem Attlee days, and I just want to see a lot more of that. So very excited. I'm hoping, there's so many people here, really hoping that I'm going to get in there to listen to Jeremy. If not, we're going to skedaddle and watch it on BBC News somewhere.
You're a lady of taste as far as news channels are concerned. Quick final question. What's Labour's policy on Brexit? I'm in a muddle about it after the last few days.
I think we've made it really clear. We want a general election. We want to see Theresa May out of Downing Street and let's let our team deal with Brexit and we get a better deal for working people.
Enjoy the speech. Thanks for talking to us. Appreciate it. Let you dash in and get a seat. Let's see who else we can quickly grab. Could I grab a quick word with you, sir?
Sure, yeah.
From the BBC. Yeah. What are you looking forward to hearing from Jeremy Corbyn?
Good question. I think it's normal kind of stuff, really. Because I joined the Labour Party to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. And
what is it about him that puts fire in your belly?
It's the ideas more than the man, because I think it's the whole way that his approach has changed how we do things in the Labour Party. Because it's not about a leader giving us orders; it's about a selection of ideas that we present to change how society works.
And if that means that you guys as activists want another referendum on Brexit and he's not that keen, he's going to have to change his mind, is he?
Yeah, because I think the motion yesterday was pretty complex and pretty nuanced.
Wishy-washy.
I wouldn't be that unfair, but it's about committing to leaving all options on the table, and I trust him to do what's best for us.
I'll let you grab a seat. Thanks a lot. Right, I think we better head in there because it's going to get underway pretty soon.
We'd like to welcome viewers from the news channel to our live coverage of Jeremy Corbyn's speech, which we're expecting in the next 5 minutes or so, although these things always tend to run a little bit late, she says, from bitter experience. I'd also like to welcome Laura Kunsberg, the BBC's political editor. What are you expecting the Labour leader to say?
I think we'll see a Jeremy Corbyn tub thumper. It will be sort of vintage Corbyn for the hall, for the crowd. But I think really, as every party does at any conference, what they're really trying to do is build up their offer, to use that terrible political jargon, build up that offer to the country. And as we know, Jeremy Corbyn believes very, very deeply that Britain isn't fair. And he believes very deeply that he's got some ideas to make it a fair place, to fix that injustice. And I think that is what we'll hear woven throughout the speech. And again, I think more of what we've heard recently calls on the Tories to get out of the way, to try to force a general election. Labour knows really it's not up to them, it's not in their gift, but they're trying very hard to kind of build this narrative around that.
We were talking about that just a little bit earlier. One of the things that we discuss ahead of a leader's speech is it more important to talk to the people here in the hall, to the party, or is it more important, if they're talking about a general election, to go over the heads of conference here and appeal to the country?
Well, as a former advisor, this was the question we grappled with. You know, you get a very unique opportunity to get into the living room of people's houses. It's an important communication message. I think Jeremy Corbyn will want to do both. Remember, he is very much of the party members and the party faithful, so he will want to throw out some old-time religion. But as Laura said, he also knows this is an important message. If I was him, I hope he would get a very sensible message about Brexit out to the country as well, because that is such a big political theme right now.
Well, and it has dominated the last few days. We'll see what he actually says in his speech. Ash, why are you here primarily? Because you're not a Labour Party member, are you? And this is very much about members and activists.
Yeah, I'm a Labour voter and I'm here to be convinced just like anyone else. I think the reason why I'm here is that I'm really interested in what movement politics are. So, like I said, the Labour Party is transformed. I think that the centre of energy is really coming from the members. I've been at the World Transformed a lot in the last week. And what's been really striking is that the people who are there, who are just mostly quite young, but, you know, ordinary people, they're not, you know, hardened politicos, is that they want a really robust and nuanced policy discussion. And it's not just Corbo loyalists, you know, parroting the line. It's people who are critiquing the policy platform from the left perspective, from a libertarian perspective, and I think generating some really creative ideas.
Now, how much right do you have to comment on what the party is doing when you're not even a member?
A cat may look at a king.
Is that what it's about?
I think it is. I think that I've never claimed to speak for the party, and I imagine lots of people in the leader's office would be very relieved about that fact. I'm just here to sort of look at this change in democratic participation.
Let's just talk about... Oh, sorry, you were going to say something.
This is one of the really interesting things this week, and although the conference seems much more at ease with itself than it has done for the last few years, when you talk to people, whether they're part of the momentum, that movement, whether they're in senior parts of the union or the party, behind closed doors, there's a big push me, pull you argument, concern about where the power base really lies now. We know the unions have put the brakes on what momentum really, really hoped for. So Jeremy Corbyn's got some of his changes, but not everything. But that is the power play that's been going on behind.
Because I think you're totally right about the fact that it feels more at ease. Yeah, you're welcome, anytime. It feels more at ease with itself. But that's because the row is less between what they would have called the moderate MPs and Corbynites or Corbynistas, because Jeremy Corbyn is very much in charge of this party, and now it's between different power bases.
I think there's definitely some truth in that, but just to take a sort of step back, I think there's been a bit of yield on both sides. So I think in terms of a lot of the sort of leadership, as they've got closer to power, I think they've actually started to think about speaking to the public a bit more and sort of becoming much more kind of professionalised. And I think for the moderates or the progress side of things, we see that actually having this huge kind of swell of brilliant, talented young people like Ash getting involved in the movement is actually a good thing as well.
Laura, we're just being told that Jeremy Corbyn is meeting Michel Barnier on Thursday, just to turn things back to Brexit. How significant do you think that is?
Well, remember, Michel Barnier has actually had lots and lots and lots of meetings with all sorts of British MPs. He's made a big feature of his door being open. So there have been a lot of contacts between
on all
the
sides,
EU, on all sides. And remember, he's also, I mean, Michel Barnier even met Jacob Rees-Mogg. However, this is part of what Labour has been trying to push, is that they are a credible alternative to carrying out, to being in the room, to being on the other side of the table from the EU. And I think, although Labour's had real, struggles and tensions over where to position themselves this week on Europe, that is something that they all agree on. They want to show, whether it's Keir Starmer or Jeremy Corbyn or John McDonnell or anyone else, they want to show that they would be up to being in the room and doing the negotiations.
Because Labour always says it would negotiate a better deal. It could do better, even though Michel Barnier would say, well, the rules will be the same.
Right, and where the evidence is that, I mean, of course they're going to say that, the opposition party, but, they also would pick and mix bits of the EU, which is what the EU doesn't like very much.
Well, and Ayesha, you said you hope you're going to hear a sensible, I think was the word you used, offer from Jeremy Corbyn. What do you mean when it comes to Brexit?
Well, I hope that he would reiterate what Keir Starmer said on the platform yesterday.
What, the line he inserted?
Yes, he inserted. And actually, I was at a small business event with John McDonnell yesterday afternoon, and he very much supported the line that Keir Starmer said. He said that actually, we will keep everything on the table. We prefer a general election. If that doesn't happen and there is a second referendum, we're not taking anything off the table, and that including the Remain option.
I think you might be waiting a long time if you think Jeremy Corbyn's going to say that from the platform. And I know that our fantastically wonderful, nerdy political viewers will be interested in the fact that that line was not in Keir Starmer's original script that would have gone through party headquarters. So they're not ruling out Remain was something he inserted at the last minute.
Well, as you say, all those political nerds out there, we have our very own fact-check Joel, who is going to be following the speech and finding out exactly what Jeremy Corbyn says and whether it's completely true. I think we can see there he is, working away, preparing himself for the speech. We'll come back to him afterwards, when we'll also be talking to the Shadow Chancellor. Yes, so you wouldn't expect that necessarily from Jeremy Corbyn, but there will have to be something else to wrap up what has been, well, a lack of clarity, I think.
But whether it will be very important to note whether he matches the same kind of tone that others have about Brexit. So when we sat down for our interview with Jeremy Corbyn yesterday, he was overtly lukewarm about the position that Keir Starmer sort of cajoled the leadership to get to. So on whether that's preparing formally to vote down the deal, Starmer's big headline yesterday, we asked Jeremy Corbyn about that. He said, well, nothing's really changed. I haven't said that. I mean, we've got our 6 tests, and he was really trying to dampen. He wasn't playing down, but his body language and his attitude. And then when I asked him if there were another referendum, would he vote to remain? He wouldn't answer it. No. I know what about 90% of people here would be on the streets, campaigning for Remain. That's not who he is.
No, I think, look, in his heart of hearts, he's always been deeply Eurosceptic. That is no surprise. And he is a man who is authentic on things. But he is also a man who's really bigging up party democracy at the moment.
Yes.
So I think the fact that he is listening to members is a thing that will, I hope, keep him on the right path on this.
But John McDonnell always said that they had to respect, the spirit as well as the letter of the referendum, but a lot of people you'll have been talking to at the World Transform, the other conference, I presume they would like to see a second referendum.
I actually had some quite interesting conversations at the World Transform. So I was talking to people who said that what they wanted was a balance between being country-facing and being membership-facing. And what they wanted to sort of negotiate between that tension, between having to shape a social coalition in terms of the country, which can include both Remainers and Leave voters, and being membership-facing, which is, you know, listen to us and all the rest of it, is there is this tiny space in the middle, which is let's create some room for Jeremy to show leadership. And I've got a kind of unpopular thing to say, which is that I think that this strategic ambiguity, and I think it has been strategic, and that's why lots of people have called
it's worked?
A fudge. I think it has worked so far, because we've got the Tories and Labour roughly neck and neck in the polls. It changed from week to week by like 3 points or whatever. And I think what Labour are waiting on is that bounce that comes with a general election. I think they would be unwise to race ahead and, you know, pin their colours to the mast too soon, because they're having to assemble quite a volatile electoral coalition. And I tell you something, if it was Tony Blair who had done this, he would be called a master of bringing people together.
I was just about to say, I completely agree with Ash, and I think what Jeremy Corbyn has done is triangulation that would make even Tony Blair blush.
And Ed Miliband.
Well, indeed. Basically, it's the Great British Fudge-Off. That is basically...
We should have had fudge rather than cake as a...
But the worst outcome for the leadership this week would have been to have the party splitting on the conference floor with different motions coming out, you know, all those agonies on Sunday night, that, you know, the one day of the year where we have to explain to our viewers what compositing really is. You know, they got to a compromise and it went through overwhelmingly on the floor. And what I know the leadership were worried about was having votes going in different directions. Yeah, there's been booing, there's been a bit of jeering, there's been a bit of unhappiness, a bit of noise on the floor when people have been talking about Brexit. But in terms of what went down on paper, the party voted for something that they could all agree on.
And which the Conservatives have not been able to broker with their own membership, mostly because they don't really do votes or motions. It's just completely unidirectional speech making.
I think all wings of the party leave Liverpool today with a settled sort of view. Now, there are still gripes, there's still margins, some people saying, look, should Key have gone this far? But there is a general consensus, and I have spoken to people from all across the party over the last 24 hours, and broadly people are in they leave much happier than they arrived.
Remember what's going to happen when everyone gets back to Westminster. Day by day by day, all of the political parties are having, you know, their sort of elastic bands stretched as far as they possibly can. So these divisions are going to be on display again. That's just the reality of it. But I agree, the leadership's been able to kind of, you know, juggle the cups of water and not quite have a terrible disaster this week in terms of their Brexit policy. But as I say, it's going to be really interesting to listen to Jeremy Corbyn's tone when he's talking about Brexit.
And his body language.
Yeah, and exactly what does he say? You know, Keir Starmer yesterday delighted the hall. I mean, it's probably been the biggest kind of applause.
Was he shocked himself, Keir Starmer, slightly by the sort of strength of the ovation and people getting to their feet?
I spoke to him last night, actually, at the Mirror party, and he said, look, he feels very confident about what he said, and he says that, you know, he's done so much work with the leadership.
He's moved the leadership,
yes,
he thinks, doesn't he?
Absolutely. And John McDonnell, the event I did with John McDonnell late yesterday afternoon, he praised Keir Starmer. He really praised Keir Starmer.
But can I just say that there is still, despite it keeping people in the hall mainly happy, and that compromise being reached here in Liverpool, there are millions of people who are potential Labour voters or have been Labour voters who voted to leave the European Union.
And there are many of
they're
those
not the majority of
they?
Labour voters.
No.
We know the polling suggests the majority of Labour voters are Remainers. But there already has been unhappiness part of the unions. But for lots and lots of voters or MPs in constituencies where there were really strong Leave constituencies, think, how on earth can you do this? You're sticking two fingers up to people.
Well, we're not really going to know that until the next general election. And one of the things I think you just have to bear in mind, for a lot of voters, Brexit is not the #1 issue. Sure. So it's possible to be a Leave voter and also think, you know what, I'm really sick of austerity, and who's going to give me the best deal on getting rid of austerity?
Ash also mentioned this idea of sort of socialist component, or more than a component, of what is being offered by Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. Has the economy taken enough of a role this week, or has it been overshadowed by Brexit to some extent?
I think it's been overshadowed by Brexit. I think that's just the era that we're in. We're in an extraordinary political climate. They have had, you know, punch through on some of their policies. You know, front page story about their childcare offer today on the Daily. It's not that there has not been anything else. No. But certainly Brexit has been the dominating factor, because love it, loathe it, whatever. That's where we are. We're in the middle of an enormous political change.
I actually don't think it's because Brexit's overshadowed it. I think it's because the centre has shifted in politics. 2 years ago, if John McDonnell gave a speech like he did, where he's essentially proposing a version of the Meidner Plan, it would have been greeted with a weeping and a wailing and a gnashing of teeth. Whereas now he looks like a very authoritative figure, a legitimate figure. And the thing is that what Corbyn's Labour has done is win the argument on an economic terrain. It's the social vision, the cultural vision, which is being contested. And I think that how we make sense of this is go back and look at 1979. Thatcher won the economic arguments first, before the social vision, the political vision was won later down the line.
Laura, I'm going to have to let you go because you're going to go into the hall because they're playing the video. I don't know if we can go into the hall briefly. It's a good time for Laura to escape. They're playing that video, which usually means we're only a couple of minutes away from Jeremy Corbyn taking to the stage. There's Diane Abbott, the Shadow Home Secretary, waiting. John Ashworth, he was sitting just here next to us, of course, the Shadow Health Secretary, looking with great anticipation, it seems, waiting for Jeremy Corbyn, hoping he's going to be there. I'm going to move my other guests up a little bit closer to me, Aisha Hazarika and Ash Sarkar, just before the speech starts. And there's Rebecca Long-Bailey, the Shadow Business Secretary. Oh, Emily Thornberry is singing in tune. They're enjoying it. To walk on. What's it like in the few minutes just before the leader gets up?
It's really exciting, actually. The atmosphere in the hall is always sort of electrifying, you know, no matter which part of the party you're from. It's a big moment, and also from a performance point of view, it's a big speech to make. There's so many people in the hall, the expectation, the emotions are high, but it's always a massive thrill to be in the hall.
Yeah, I meant to say walk alone rather than walk on, as I'm being told in my ear. What about you? I mean, how many of these speeches have you heard?
One, and it was last year. I've got to be honest with you, I got really teary at the speech last year. There was this moment where he was describing a woman who became part of her trade union because she'd seen some fish and chips which were wrapped in a newspaper, and that's how she learned about union organisation. And I don't know if it was like the 3-day hangover, but I honestly got really weepy.
All a bit emotional.
And I think that, you know, Corbyn's really good at those kind of moments where he's sort of bringing it down to this very tangible, very emotionally touching level of communicating politics, and I hope for some of those moments today.
And you do need to be able to engage with the audience at quite a personal level.
You do. It's interesting. The hall is so big. You need to be able to sort of project to all of these people, but you also need to be able to try and make a sort of connection. You need to be emotional. You need to tell stories. You need to sort of give some passion, and lots of clap lines, and you need a few jokes at the beginning.
Which is where you would come in, of course, Aisha. Is it always easy to write those jokes for leaders on these though?
I have had some absolute nightmares trying to prepare jokes for leaders in this hall.
Well, on that, there is Jeremy Corbyn. There's the Labour leader. He's just entered the conference hall, shaking hands with some of his colleagues. There's John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor. As I say, he'll be coming to join us after the speech. Everyone's standing up, obviously, to greet him. There is the Deputy Leader, Tom Watson, whom we spoke to yesterday. Everybody obviously excited to hear from the Labour leader after the build-up this week. Our guests have helped build some of the atmosphere, waving to the hall. Let's go inside and listen to the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, give his annual conference speech. Jeremy Corbyn enjoying the welcome he's receiving. Of course, Oh, Jeremy Corbyn being sung by the crowd there. Everyone seems to be having a very good time. The speech is expected to be about an hour. It was long last year, it was longer than an hour, but I'm told he was restricted to 60 minutes. Let's see, if there's lots of applause and standing ovations, it will overrun.
Thank you. Thank you, conference, for that fantastic welcome. And I want to start in the way that I know you'd all want me to start, by thanking the workers, the fantastic staff at this conference centre. all those that work in the hotels and restaurants all across Liverpool, and a really big thank you to all the Labour Party staff who make this whole conference possible and run it so well. Thank you to all of them. And a huge, huge thank you to the people of Liverpool. It is a fantastic city, and you've made us so welcome here this week, as you always do whenever we're in Liverpool. Thank you so much for the spirit and the humour of Liverpool. And if I could also do this, I want to say a big thank you to all of my family for the support that they give me and the help and advice that they give me. There is actually always a great deal of advice being given. But in particular, I would like to say a big thank you to my wife, Laura. Tu eres mi fuerza y mi apoyo. Gracias, Laurita. And congratulations to conference, to all of you, on what I think we can all agree on unanimously has been a great conference. A conference of a Labour Party that's ready to take charge, to start the work of rebuilding our divided country. This year, we marked the centenary of the Representation of the People Act, which saw 8 million women getting the vote for the first time, along with 5.5 million working-class men. We now have more women members of the Labour Party than the entire membership, male and female, of the Conservative and Liberal Democrat parties put together. And we mark that centenary with Jenny Formby as our new General Secretary. I've known Jenny for many years. Her integrity, her determination, they are real assets to our party. And since Jenny took over, we've registered significant electoral successes. In May, we saw the only bit of blue in Greater Manchester turn red as Labour won back Trafford Council. I know there's a bit of Liverpool-Manchester rivalry, I've just been told about it, and it can become a bit of a thing, so I'll just say this. There's not a single Conservative councillor on Merseyside either. And not a single Tory councillor in this great city of Liverpool. And across the country, we built on the gains Labour made in the general election. In the South West, we won back Plymouth. Well done, Plymouth. In the North, we won Kirklees. Well done, Kirklees. And we had our best council results in London since 1971. In Scotland too, Labour is once again offering a message of hope and real change. The choice is clear: investment and a fairer society under Labour, or austerity under the Tories, timidly accepted by the SNP. We've also been raising more money for our party, but not a penny of our funds came from a dodgy donor or a shady businessman's club. Our money comes from hundreds of thousands of people across our country who believe in what we all stand for. So I don't have to play tennis with an oligarch in order to keep the party organisation running. Because Labour trades in hope for the many, not favours for the few. Our mass membership is not just a source of funds, of course. That membership and our millions of affiliated trade union members are the voice of their workplaces and their communities. And with our new community organisers, we will anchor everything we do in people's day-to-day experiences. That is our strength. And together, we're going to change Britain. Those of you with eagle eyes may have noticed that not everyone is entirely happy about all of this. It turns out that the billionaires who apparently own the bulk of the British press don't like us one little bit. Now, it could be because we're going to clamp down on tax dodging, or maybe because we don't fawn over them at white-tie dinners and cocktail parties, or it could even be because Tom Watson has been campaigning for a second part of the Levison media inquiry to be set up. Thank you, Tom. Something the last Prime Minister promised but failed to deliver. We must and we will protect the freedom of the press to challenge unaccountable power. Journalists from Turkey to Myanmar and Colombia are being imprisoned, harassed, and sometimes killed by authoritarian governments and powerful corporate interests, just for doing their job of trying to find out the truth of the oppression that happens in their societies. But here, the free press has far too often meant the freedom to spread lies and half-truths and to smear the powerless, not take on the powerful. You challenge their propaganda of privilege by using the mass media of the 21st century, social media. And we'll do it in traditional ways too, on the doorsteps, in the town centres, at the school gates, in the community centres, so that people know there is a Labour Party that will stand up for them and is ready to rebuild and transform Britain. Next year marks the 200th anniversary of the Peterloo massacre, when 15 peaceful demonstrators were killed and hundreds injured on the streets of Manchester by troops sent in by the Tories to suppress the struggle for democratic rights. The great English poet Percy Shelley wrote a poem about the massacre, and that was the origin of our slogan, "For the many, not the few." Among those killed at Peterloo was a man named John Ashworth and a woman named Sarah Jones. In the next Labour government, our very own John Ashworth as Health Secretary and Sarah Jones as Housing Minister will be carrying forward the struggle to protect and extend democratic rights, hopefully they won't become martyrs in the process. And we will honour the heroes of Peterloo by being true to their cause, with the Labour Party fighting for democracy and social justice against poverty and inequality and discrimination. And if we are to get the chance to put these values into practice in government, we're going to need unity to do it. Our movement has achieved nothing when divided. The only winners have been the rich and the party of the rich, the Conservatives. Real unity is based on the freedom to disagree and debate, and then come together around a democratic decision, as we've done this week. So we need to foster a much greater culture of tolerance, an end to abuse online and in person. We must learn to listen a bit more and shout a bit less, to focus on what unites us, to accept losing a vote while maintaining the right to pick up the debate again. We are on a journey together, and we can only complete that journey together. Our party must speak for the overwhelming majority of our country. Labour is a broad church and can be broader still. I want to lead in that spirit. After all, I appointed John McDonnell, despite him being a Liverpool fan. And Andrew Gwynn, who supports Manchester City. As you can see, there's lots of unity around the shadow cabinet. Conference, we're winning the public debate. We've defined the new common sense, and that's where our party can stand united. This summer was tough. Ours is the party of equality for all, the party that has pioneered every progressive initiative to root out racism from our society. But conference, being anti-racist means we must listen to those communities suffering discrimination and abuse. I believe we're all stronger from listening and learning from each other. The Jewish people have suffered a long and terrible history of persecution and genocide. I was humbled to see that in a memorial 2 years ago when I visited the former Nazi concentration camp at Terezin in the Czech Republic. The row over anti-Semitism has caused immense hurt and anxiety in the Jewish community and great dismay in the Labour Party. But I hope and believe we can work together to draw a line under it. I say this to all in the Jewish community. This party, this movement, will always be implacable campaigners against anti-Semitism and racism in all its forms. We are your ally. We are your ally, and the next Labour government will guarantee whatever support necessary to ensure the security of Jewish community centres and places of worship, as we will for any other community experiencing hateful behaviour and physical attacks. We will work with Jewish communities to eradicate anti-Semitism, both within our party and wider society. And with your help, I will fight for that with every breath that I possess. Anti-racism. Anti-racism is integral to our very being. It's part of who you all are. It's part of who we are, of who I am. So conference won't accept anything like that when we're attacked by Tory hypocrites who accuse us of anti-Semitism one day, then endorse Viktor Orban's hard-right government the next day. Or when they accuse others of racism while they work to create a hostile environment for all migrant communities. We can never be complacent about the scourge of racism. Race hate is a growing threat that has to be confronted. not just here in Britain, but across Europe and the United States. The far right is on the rise, doing what they always do, blaming minorities, Jews, Muslims, migrants, for the failure of a broken economic system. Its victims include the Windrush generation, who helped rebuild Britain after the war, and then were thrown under the bus by a government that reckoned there were votes to be had by pandering to prejudice. The hostile environment policies, shameful brainchild of the present Prime Minister, led to the scandal, and the scandal it is, of British citizens being deported, detained, and left destitute. This is a nasty, cynical politics that demeans our whole country. And the Tories still haven't learnt. This week they received a letter from the anti-Semitic and Islamophobic Hungarian government thanking them for their solidarity, just at the same time as the rest of Europe were united in being appalled at what the Hungarian government has been doing. Our party will never stay silent in the face of growing Islamophobia, whether from the far right, on the streets, or the former Foreign Secretary's disgraceful dog-whistle jibes at Muslim women. Labour will work to bring communities together. It is only through the unity of all our people that we can deliver social justice for anyone. Conference, change in our country is long overdue. Every month this government remains in office, things get worse. Evidence of the failure of privatisation and outsourcing is piling up day after day. What's long been a scam is now a crisis. Just look at the last few months. The Birmingham prison, run by G4S, had to be brought back into public ownership after the Chief Inspector of Prisons described it as the worst he'd ever visited. The privatised probation service on the brink of meltdown. Richard Bergen, the next Secretary of State for Justice, will end this scandal. On the railways, the East Coast franchise has collapsed for the third time in a decade, bailed out yet again by the taxpayers. Do you know what? You get on a train at King's Cross and you never know who'll be running the train by the time you get to Edinburgh. Andy MacDonald, our Transport Secretary, will end this shambles and bring about a serious, sensible transport policy. And the giant privateer Carillion has gone bankrupt, sunk in a sea of reckless greed, leaving hospitals half-built, workers dumped on the dole, pensions in peril, while the Carillion directors continued to stuff their pockets with bonuses and dividends, and small businesses in the supply chain took heavy losses or went bust. And speaking of bankruptcy, the Tories are now extending it into their own backyard. A Conservative government and Conservative local councillors have combined to push Northamptonshire over the edge, putting vital services to those who need and rely on them at risk. 8 years of destructive austerity and obsessive outsourcing have left either councils teetering on the precipice too, and this government must be held to account for their social vandalism they're carrying out across the country. It is Labour councils and only Labour councils that are taking every step to protect people and services, and we must thank them for it. Thank those councillors for the work they do day in and day out. Privatisation and outsourcing are now a national disaster zone. And Labour is ready to call time on this racket. We will rebuild the public realm and create a genuinely mixed economy for the 21st century. And after a decade of austerity, the next Labour government will confront the challenge of rebuilding our public services. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the National Health Service, Labour's proudest creation, and it stands as a beacon. A beacon all over the world to those fighting for universal health care, free at the point of need. Its founder, Aneurin Bevan, inspired by the collective health provision in his hometown of Tredegar, described a free health service as pure socialism, and so it is. We all contribute through our taxes so that it is there for all of us whenever we need it. But this Conservative government has pushed our NHS into crisis, with more people waiting longer in accident and emergency and to see a doctor, and over 4 million people on hospital waiting lists. And, as we were discussing earlier, there is a mental health crisis too, causing real pain and anguish. A woman named Angela wrote to me recently, and she said, "My mentally ill daughter was told she would have to wait 12 months to get an appointment with an appropriate therapist. As a mother, I'm at my wit's end to know how to help her anymore. I would hate her to become another suicide statistic." This has to stop, and under Labour it will. We will deliver real parity of esteem for mental health services to protect people like Angela's daughter. Then there's a scandal of the Tories' £6 billion cuts to social care, leaving 400,000 fewer older people receiving care. Too many of our older people condemned to live alone and isolated, often ending up in A&E through neglect, then unable to leave hospital because it's not safe for them. Austerity is putting other strains on the NHS too. 1 in 5 homes in England are now unfit for human habitation. 120,000 children are living in temporary accommodation. So, as John Healey has pledged, we will put a levy on those with second homes. Think of it as a solidarity fund. A solidarity fund for those with 2 homes to help those without any home at all. And Labour will embark on the biggest home building programme in half a century. Meanwhile, for too many people, social security has become a system of institutionalised bullying and degradation. The Tories have created a hostile environment for disabled people. Hundreds of people from all over the country write to me about it every week. People like Richard, who says this: "My wife was diagnosed with progressive multiple sclerosis 20 years ago. A few months ago, we were told she needed to reapply for personal independence payments. She had an assessment by somebody who was not medically trained. We've now been told that all her benefit will be stopped." And he adds, I have tried to be her rock, but the stress and suffering I can see my wife going through is so very cruel, and I've had to put myself on antidepressants. These are human consequences of a Tory government that puts tax cuts for the wealthy ahead of care for the disabled people of our society. But Labour is ready to put fairness and humanity back at the heart of our public services. And as Diane Abbott told us yesterday, you can't keep people safe on the cheap. That's reflected in the fears of people like Ruth, who told me we've had an increase in our council tax to pay for more police, but we have no police station. The only increase we've had is in the crime rate. I worry about my elderly parents' safety in their own home. Ruth's fears are not unfounded. Violent crime is rising, while police numbers have fallen to their lowest level for 30 years. The Chief Constable of Bedfordshire says we do not have the resources to keep residents safe, and no one seems to be listening. Well, Labour is listening. We'll put another 10,000 police officers back on our streets, playing a vital role in tackling crime and making people safer. But if we want to reduce crime, more police are only part of the solution. Every study tells us that investing in young people and communities is key, and crime thrives amidst economic failure. So, under Labour, there will be no more left behind areas and no more forgotten communities. We know the earliest years are a crucial time to open up children's life chances. Yesterday, I visited the Greenhouse Nursery here in Liverpool and heard their experiences and talked to the children there. But across the country, nurseries can't make ends meet. Youth clubs and nurseries are closing. Decent early years education is now at risk of becoming a privilege. Families most in need are not even entitled to it, and many who struggle to claim it because of the system's fragmented and underfunded nature. This government's limited childcare pledge has turned out to be free in name only. So today, I can announce that Labour will make 30 hours a week of free childcare available for all 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds. And we will provide additional subsidised hours for childcare on top of the free 30 hours allowance, free for those on the lowest incomes and capped at £4 an hour for the rest. Labour will also invest in the people who care for and educate our children. We'll raise the standards of childcare across the board with a 10-year plan to shift to a graduate-led workforce and improve the pay and skills of all childcare staff. With a new national pay scale for all early years workers starting at £10 an hour. This is an investment and a pay rise for a workforce, 98% of whom are women and 85% of whom earn around the minimum wage. Patchy support for childcare is holding back too many parents and families and the life chances of too many children. This universal, free, high-quality childcare will benefit parents, families and children all across our country. Driving up standards for childcare will make the vital difference for millions of our children. Labour is offering a long overdue change that will transform people's lives and meet the needs of the 21st century Britain for all. We're talking about rebuilding Britain this week, but I also want to make an appeal to the older generation who built modern Britain. It was you who rebuilt our country after the war, kick-started our economy, built our NHS and created our social security system. It was your generation that built the council housing, won our rights at work and made our country a better place for all. It was your work and taxes that paid for a better retirement for those who went before you. So we owe it to you the older generation, to rebuild Britain so you have peace of mind and dignity. And we will fulfil that obligation with a triple lock on pensions, protected, along with the winter fuel allowance, a bus pass, and a national health and care service that can look after you and your families with the respect that you deserve. This is solidarity between all generations. Conference, to rebuild our public services and our communities, we're going to have to rebuild and transform our economy for the 21st century. We can no longer tolerate a setup where the real economy, in which millions work, is just a sort of sideshow for the City of London and for banks fixated on piling up profits around the world. The change we need requires new ideas and new thinking, as well as learning from those that have worked in the past and in other countries. We need to explore new forms of ownership and public enterprise and learn from creative local initiatives, from those taken by local councils, including Preston in the northwest. And let's take up the call from TUC General Secretary Francis O'Grady to use new technologies and automation as an opportunity rather than a threat, a chance to raise living standards and give people more control over their own lives. Inequality is not just a matter of incomes. It's about having a real say too. That's why we're not only determined to rebuild our economy, communities and public services, but also to democratise them and change the way our economic system is run in the interests of the majority. John McDonnell's proposals for inclusive ownership funds will mean workers sharing more fairly in the rewards of successful businesses. And I listened carefully to the words of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and read the excellent Commission on Economic Justice report he was involved in, which rightly argued economic justice needs to be hardwired into the way the economy works. The 19th century Chartist leader and poet, Ernest Jones, wrote this: "And what we get and what we give, we know, and we know our share. We're not too low, the cloth we weave, but too low, the cloth to wear." He was making the point that workers know the reality and injustice of their position. Labour believes a worker's position is on the board. That's why we're proposing to give the workforce of all large UK businesses the right to elect a third of the seats on the board, giving employees a genuine voice and a stake, and shifting the balance at work in favour of the wealth creators, improving both decision-making and productivity in the process. Decisions taken in boardrooms affect people's pay, their jobs, and their pensions. Workers deserve a real say in those decisions. It's actually nothing for businesses to be afraid of. They should welcome the expertise and the understanding that workers will bring to the company board. We will rebalance power in the workplace. But I say to businesses large and small, Labour will also deliver what you need to succeed and to expand and modernise our economy. More investment in transport and housing and digital infrastructure. More investment in education and skills so workers can be more productive. Action to save the high street, as Rebecca Long-Bailey set out yesterday. And action to deal with rip-off bills that hit us all. But most of all, a commitment to a Brexit that protects the jobs, the economy and trade, and determined opposition to one that does not. Ten years ago this month, the whole edifice of greed is good, deregulated financial capitalism, lauded for a generation as the only way to run a modern economy, came crashing down to earth with devastating consequences. But instead of making essential changes to a broken economic system, the political and corporate establishment strained every sinew to bail out and prop up the system that led to the crash in the first place. The price of that has not just been stagnation, wages falling for the longest period in recorded history, and almost a decade of deeply damaging cuts to public services. It's also fueled a growth of racism and xenophobia and has led to a crisis in democracy both at home and abroad. People in this country know that the old way of running things is not working anymore. And unless we, the Labour Party, offer radical solutions, others will fill the gap with the politics of blame and division. That's why Labour speaks for the new majority. Why last year we won the biggest increase in the Labour vote since 1945, and why Labour's ideas have indeed caught the mood of the times. And conference, it isn't me saying that. No, not me. It's a former Conservative Treasury Minister, Lord O'Neill. I've never sought to capture the mood of a Tory minister before, and let me say to his lordship, you're welcome. Come and join us in the new political mainstream if you wish. That failed free-for-all, which led to the crash of a decade ago, has also fueled the global environmental crisis and hamstrung international efforts to tackle it. There is no bigger threat facing humanity than climate change. And 21 years ago, Labour's then Deputy Leader, John Prescott, played a prominent role in helping to secure the Kyoto Protocol. Thank you, John, and thank you for being here today and supporting us. That united the world's major economies behind an agreement to cut carbon emissions and obliged them to give poorer countries access to low-carbon technology. It was about solidarity, recognising that the air we breathe does not respect national boundaries. And we all have an interest in every nation of reducing emissions and giving us all cleaner, less polluted air. The contrast with the America First posturing of Donald Trump and his decision to pull out of the Paris climate change accords could not be sharper. We only have one planet, so we must re-engage with countries seeking to walk away from Paris. We must also lead by example. Yesterday, Rebecca Long-Bailey set out our plans for energy, developed with our Environment Shadow Secretary Sue Hayman. Plans that are ambitious, that will create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and will make Britain the only developed country outside Scandinavia to be on track to meet our climate change obligations. That will mean working with unions to ensure jobs and skills are protected as we move towards a low-carbon economy, and working with industry to change the way we build, to train the workforce that will retrofit our homes and work in the new energy industries too. So I can announce this today, that our programme of investment and transformation to achieve a 60% reduction in emissions by 2030 will create over 400,000 skilled jobs to ensure that comes about. Good jobs. Good jobs based here and on union rates, bringing skills and security to communities all over the country that have been held back for far too long. And we will go further with plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero by the middle of the century. And I am determined that we achieve that. I know that sounds ambitious, and it is, and will be delivered with the most far-reaching programme of investment and transformation in decades. Labour will kickstart a green jobs revolution that will help tackle climate change, provide sustainable energy for the future, and create skilled jobs in every nation and region of this country. But it's not just the economic system that is unsustainable. Britain's relationship with the rest of the world, our foreign policy, is no longer sustainable either. We're entering a new, fast-changing and more dangerous world, including the reckless attacks in Salisbury, which the evidence painstakingly assembled by the police now points clearly to the Russian state. When President Trump takes the US out of the Paris Accord and tries to scrap the Iran nuclear deal, moves the US embassy to Jerusalem and pursues aggressive nationalism and trade wars, he is turning his back on international cooperation and even on international law. We need a government in Britain that not only keeps the country safe, but can also speak out for democratic values and human rights. Today's Conservative government continues to collude with the disastrous Saudi-led war in Yemen, turning a blind eye to evidence of war crimes and the devastating suffering of millions of civilians. That's why I was honoured to attend the vigil this week held in Liverpool by the Yemeni community in protest against what is taking place. Labour's foreign policy will be driven by progressive values and international solidarity, led by our international team, Emily Thornberry, Kate Osamore and Neil Griffith. This means no more reckless wars of intervention like Iraq or Libya. It means putting negotiation before confrontation, diplomacy before tub-thumping threats. And it means championing human rights and democracy everywhere, not just where it's commercially convenient. And working to resolve the world's injustices, not standing idly by, or worse, fueling them in the first place. Sometimes our hopes can be betrayed. Many of us campaigned for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, imprisoned by the Myanmar military for fighting for democracy. Today, the Myanmar military government, which Aung San Suu Kyi nominally leads, stands accused of grave atrocities against the Rohingya people. Nearly 1 million have fled to neighbouring Bangladesh, and women and girls in particular face appalling violence. We demand that the Myanmar government ends its horrific ethnic cleansing and allows the Rohingya people to return home and rebuild their communities and their lives in safety and security. And let me say a few words about the ongoing denial of justice and rights to the Palestinian people. Our party is united in condemning the shooting of hundreds of unarmed demonstrators in Gaza by Israeli forces and the passing of Israel's discriminatory nation-state law. The continuing occupation, the expansion of illegal settlements, and the imprisonment of Palestinian children are an outrage. We support a two-state solution to the conflict with a secure Israel and a viable and secure Palestinian state. But a quarter of a century on from the Oslo Accords, we are no closer to justice or peace, and the Palestinian tragedy continues, while the outside world stands by. As my great Israeli friend, the late Uri Avnery, who sadly died a short while ago, put it to me, what is the alternative to peace? A catastrophe for both peoples. And in order to help make that two-state settlement a reality, we will recognise a Palestinian state as soon as we take office. We will also make a far more determined effort to help bring an end to the terrible war in Syria, a war that has led to millions of refugees. Some of whom I met in Jordan this summer, wonderful, brave people, desperate to go home, desperate to see peace, wondering how their families are getting on at home a short distance away, and whose plight Alf Dubs described so powerfully yesterday. Alf, thank you for that, and thank you for all you do for refugees all the time. The Syrian conflict has been fueled by the military intervention of multiple powers, and it will need those same powers to deliver a negotiated peace settlement, to end the killing and allow those wonderful refugees the right, which they want, to return home to their own country. But Labour's plans to rebuild and transform our country and its relationship with the rest of the world having to be made against the backdrop of huge uncertainty about Brexit. Labour respects the decision of the British people in the referendum, but no one can respect the conduct of the British government since the vote took place. We all hoped that the people's decision would be followed by effective and responsible negotiations that would protect living standards and jobs. Instead, the main negotiations that have been taking place are actually between different factions of the Tory party, and the only job the government is fighting to protect is that of the Prime Minister. Theresa May used to say that no deal is better than a bad deal. Yet now, after 2 years of botched negotiations, she's threatening the country with just that choice, a bad deal or no deal. That is a threat to our whole economy, especially our manufacturing industry, and to the tens of thousands of skilled jobs in the supply chains here in Britain. Now, time is running out. Companies are losing patience in the absence of any clarity from the government. They are planning to relocate jobs abroad and in taking investment with them. Some have already started, and I fear more will follow. The Tories are well aware of this, but some see Brexit as their opportunity to impose a free market shock doctrine on Britain. The Prime Minister is in New York today, promising that a post-Brexit Britain will offer the lowest corporation taxes of all G20 nations. Handouts to the few, paid for by the many, and an already tried and failed strategy for boosting investment. Sajid Javid has set out his plan for more tax giveaways and ripping up people's pensions rights. Liam Fox is itching to secure and scrap workers' rights and privatise the NHS with a side order of chlorinated chicken. And then there's Jacob Rees-Mogg. No, Jacob has expressed his personal faith in Brexit Britain. It's personal, and he's expressed it so nicely, because he's decided to base his new investment fund in the Eurozone. The Tory Brexiteers unite the politics of the 1950s with the economics of the 19th century, daydreaming about a Britannia that both rules the waves and waves the rules. Labour's job is now to win support for a deal that meets the needs of the country, combined with our plan to rebuild and transform, with investment in our people and our economy. Our priority is clear. We aim to get the best Brexit deal for jobs and living standards to underpin our plans to upgrade our economy and invest in every community and every region. That will bring people together and meet concerns of both those who voted leave and those who voted remain. Conference, the way ahead is clear. We will vote against any reduction in rights, standards, protections, and oppose a deregulatory race to the bottom. Let me say to the country, as it stands, Labour will vote against the Chequers plan, or whatever is left of it, and oppose leaving the EU with no deal. And it is inconceivable that we should crash out of Europe with no deal. It would be a national disaster. That is why, if Parliament votes down a Tory deal, or the government fails to reach any deal at all, we would press for a general election. Failing that, all options are on the table. Let me thank Keir Starmer, the man who would lead our Brexit negotiations. Keir, having got agreement yesterday in this conference hall, getting one in Brussels should be a piece of cake. But let me also reach out to the Prime Minister. You see, I reach out to everybody who's currently apparently doing the negotiations. Brexit is about the future of our country and our vital interests. It's not about leadership squabbles or parliamentary posturing. I say this to her in all sincerity and helpfulness. If you deliver a deal that includes a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, if you protect jobs, people's rights at work and environmental and consumer standards, then we will support that sensible deal, a deal that would be backed by most of businesses in the world and trade unions. But if you can't negotiate that deal, then you need to make way for a party that can and will. Conference Labour is offering a real alternative to the people of Britain, a radical plan to rebuild and transform our country, an alternative to the politics of austerity, of social division and of international conflict. Where the Tories have divided and ruled, we will unite and govern. We represent the new common sense of our time. And we are ready to deliver on it. We must speak for the people, to whom Theresa May promised so much, but has delivered so little. And we must take our message to every town, city and village, united and ready to win, as we were in 1945, in 1964 and in 1997. So that when we meet this time next year, let it be as a Labour government. A Labour government investing in Britain after years of austerity and neglect, bringing our country together after a decade of division. Conference, let every constituency, every community know Labour is ready, confident in our ideas, clear in our plans, committed to rebuild Britain. We don't want to live in a society where some of our fellow citizens sleep rough. A strong society is one that gives all young people the chance to realise their potential, and in which all of us know that if our parents need care, they will get it. Our task is to build Britain. Build a Britain together. Build a Britain for that security together, and we can. Thank you, Conference.
Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, ending his fourth conference speech as leader of the Labour Party. There will now no doubt be a long-standing ovation. There were several through the speech. And the Labour leader was decidedly more comfortable than he's been in previous years. It was a confident speech. He ended it with saying that the party is united, where the Tories have divided. They will unite and govern, and they are ready to govern, as Labour was in previous governments, 1945, 1964 and 1997. Brexit has dominated this conference to a certain degree, and he had an offer for the Prime Minister. He said as it stood now, Labour would vote against Theresa May's Chequers plan, but he said if she were to deliver a deal that included a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, and one which protected jobs and people's rights at work, then that might be a deal that Labour could back. Conference now entering into that familiar refrain of, oh, Jeremy Corbyn. People obviously standing up, liking what they've heard. Jeremy Corbyn joining in the applause. Smiles all round. He, of course, touched on all the issues that you would expect. He said it had been a tough summer, though, for Labour, pointing to the anti-Semitism row. He said it had caused extreme hurt in the Jewish community, but said, we are your allies. And he said, we want to work together. That led, actually, to one of the first standing ovations by conference. He condemned the Conservatives for their support of the right-wing Hungarian government of Viktor Orban, and then set out his pledge on anti-austerity, nationalisation of the railways. He wanted to put the mental health crisis, as he called it, give it parity of esteem when it came to services, and talked about not leaving behind anybody, no left behind or forgotten communities. There's a solidarity fund on housing that Labour would put in place, and then, of course, the big pledge on free childcare, extending it, universal free childcare for all 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds. He criticised the government for creating a hostile environment for disabled people, and then said there was no greater threat to humanity than climate change. He mentioned John Prescott, the former Labour deputy leader, thanked him for all his work and thanked him for being there at the conference, and then talked about foreign policy. He mentioned the reckless attacks on Salisbury, saying the evidence points clearly to the Russian state. And he also said about the Palestinian cause, something that a cause that he's held very close to his heart, and said that when they came to office, one of the first things they would do is recognise a Palestinian state. With me here, still, sitting, listening to all of that, we now have the BBC's chief political correspondent, Norman Smith, Aisha Hazarika and Ash Sarkar. What were your thoughts initially about the way he handled himself in that speech?
I thought he just looked extraordinarily relaxed. This is a man who is supremely confident in his own beliefs, in addressing a party which, you know, adores him. And I think part of the reason he's so relaxed is not just he's getting more familiar with the job. I mean, you go back a year or so and often, you know, he looked tense, unhappy, grumpy, he'd rather be anywhere. I think part of the reason he looks more relaxed is this is Corbyn. This is what he believes. These are his sort of long-standing convictions. And when you speak about something and you just tell it as you see it, it does give you a degree of fluency. He's not having to shape it or spin it. This is what he believes, and he fundamentally believes that previous Labour governments, by signing up to what he calls greed is good capitalism, have paved the way for globalisation, privatisation, deregulation, deindustrialisation, and his pitch to this party and to the country is we will do things very, very differently.
And now, of course, we can hear the traditional rendition of the red flag. In fact, Barry Gardiner, the Shadow International Trade Secretary, was whistling it. It's one of his many talents, I'm sure, when it comes to conference time and the leader's speech. What does that mean now when they are talking about preparing for government? Because we had this discussion before that there isn't a general election on the cards.
There isn't, but I mean, the basic aim of this conference was for Labour to come out of it and be seen as an alternative government in waiting. And that is why, frankly, the speech was so extraordinarily long, because Mr. Corbyn sort of did a wrap-up of all the policies that have been announced during this conference. And there have been an awful lot, really quite meaty, chunky policies, you know, handing out 10% of shares to workers, nationalising the railways within 5 years, cracking down on second home ownership, ending school academies and free schools. I mean, a lot of policies. And the idea is to create the impression of a government good to go. We have the ideas, we have the policies, this is our agenda. The problem they've had is cutting through the Brexit noise. And, you know, that is still there. And I thought it interesting just at the end when Jeremy Corbyn got onto the Brexit issue. I felt he was again trying to mould their stance on Brexit with this idea, I reach out to Theresa May. And I imagine he and John McDonnell are petrified that Brexit-supporting Labour voters watching this conference will think, aye, aye, Labour is lining up to back another referendum with Remain on the table.
They're singing Jerusalem now in the hall. Aisha, what did you make of the speech?
Well, very much agree. Look, this is Jeremy Corbyn standing there. This is his party now, lock, stock and barrel. He owns every bit of the party machine, and he's pushing through the agenda, which, as Norman said, you know, he's been promulgating for a long time. Although, in my old boss's defence, Ed Miliband, in this very hall in Liverpool in 2011, we did a very famous speech called Producers and Predators.
Well done,
which was all about kind of bad capitalism and good capitalism. We all remember it.
And what you're saying is now come of age.
It has. I knew it would come. I knew its place would come. But look, I very much agree. I think he's sending out a very, very strong signal that they have done some deep thinking. They've got a radical, challenging policy agenda. The childcare offer as well, very, very sort of popular. So sort of something for everybody. Older people as well, committing to keeping the triple pension lock. That's a shot across the bow to the Conservatives, to older voters as well. They know that they have a bit of a problem with sort of older voters. So I think this was a punchy speech. Look, that's a great haul for him, and he can just stand out, give out all-time religion. Everyone will sing, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn." I liked the cut of his jib today. I liked the stuff he said. The question is, his criticism to Theresa May was, look, you've promised a lot, but what can you deliver? And the same question will, of course, apply to him. Can he convince the British public, not just that hall who love him, the 13,000 people in that hall who absolutely love him, can he convince the British public to get him into Downing Street?
Well, they're dancing in the hall. Ash, please, you can dance, of course, if you want to. No, I'm only kidding. You can stay on your stools. There's a party atmosphere inside the hall, which really underlines what Aisha's been saying, is that they love him. They love him in the hall. The Labour Party and the delegates are very much him now. What about to the wider audience, the voting public?
Well, I thought that he looked prime ministerial in this speech, as well as having that characteristic Corbyn humanity, that kind of tenderness with how he delivers his lines. And I think that he was incredibly country-facing. So the childcare policy, I think, would go very well with the women of my family, who often were made to take up precarious housing because their outgoings in terms of childcare costs were so high. You look at the offer being made to deindustrialise areas, the renewal of green industry, addressing the social and economic forces that drove Brexit, rather than simply treating it as a parlour game and trying to carve out your own little political fiefdom. I think that this was a tremendously unifying policy platform. I think it shows that Labour are really occupying that coveted centre ground in terms of economic orthodoxy, and I imagine that this will go a great way to healing some of those divisions that were opened up in 2016.
I mean, one of the interesting things, the calculation of the Corbyn team is that the centre ground has now shifted. So they take the view a lot of these policies, which might in previous years have been thought of as, you know, pitched.
Well, like during the time of Ed Miliband.
Pitched at a traditional Labour audience. They take the view that years of austerity have now sort of eaten into, if you like, middle-class confidence in the way things are. And that families previously, who would not really give house room to some of these ideas about nationalisation, are now beginning to think, well, yeah, no, maybe there's a point there. So, you know, they take the pitch that the policy agenda now is not a left-wing policy agenda, because they believe the Senate, now that will be tested, that will be tested. I think there's a second thing which will be tested, and that's the credibility factor. You can't ignore the real alarm in the private sector and business about what this is going to mean.
Right, but John McDonnell's clearly set out his plan. He thinks he's done a lot of work, and I'm sure he has, in terms of reaching out to business. Do you think that he is credible with his offer?
I think he personally, I mean, although, you know, I think Jeremy Corbyn talked about, you know, we're not going to have prawn cocktails and going to dinner parties and all that sort of thing. John McDonnell has in his own way been doing precisely that, trying to offer some sort of reassurance that this isn't a madcap idea to tear down capitalism. It's about reframing it, it's about rebalancing the workplace, which, he argues, actually might boost productivity if employees feel they have an incentive in a company, and likewise might actually encourage investment in the company if they, you know, have a stake in where shares and money should go.
And it is all about tilting the balance, as they see it, to the worker and away from employers.
This is a big theme of John McDonnell's economic narrative. It's about giving workers, I mean, the phrase take back control could be sort of quite apt here. It's about giving workers a greater voice and seat at the table, the idea of a third of workers being on the board. Now, let's be honest, this is an idea that Theresa May herself at one point floated. And what I'm very struck by at this conference is the number of businesses that have come back to conference. For the last couple of years, the lobbyists, the business organisations, they have stayed away. Interestingly, they are back this year, and the man they all want to get a meeting with is the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell.
Yes, because they think they must prepare for a Labour government, because it could happen if there were to be a general election, bearing in mind politics is so volatile. But in what is being offered by John McDonnell, in some of the plans he's put forward, there's still been an adverse reaction from the CBI and other parts of the business community who feel that his plans are too draconian.
I mean, the thing is if you look at the proposals in terms of workers' shares and workers' representation, you're talking about like workers' shares in firms of roughly 10%. There's room for that to go further later down the line, and workers' representations of boards at, I think it's a third. That's not actually particularly draconian or wild, and it's a real case of, you know, nothing to hide, nothing to fear. It's only those companies who have been relying on incredibly opaque decision-making structures, who have been banking on exploitative hiring practices, on poverty wages. They're the ones who've got something to fear, not those corporations who are genuinely interested.
Well, we're going to talk to
John
McDonnell about the plans and exactly how they would be following them up with businesses who at this moment are actually against some of the plans that he has. Let's talk about Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. That is a partnership that has been very close for a very long time. But do you think John McDonnell has been more the star of this week than Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, obviously he's had his leader speech today.
I mean, I think they are quite an effective double act, if I'm honest. Jeremy Corbyn is the front man. He is the figure who many people can relate to, because he is a different sort of politician. You know, if you think of these sort of conference speeches, Tony Blair used to be streaming in sweat, David Cameron used to be stalking the stage. Jeremy Corbyn is, you know, he's like your affable uncle. He's a very different sort of politician, and that does appeal to a lot of people. And John McDonnell is like the intellectual, political hard nose of the operation.
All right, well, let's find Vicky Young. She's mingling in the crowds there as everybody exits from the conference hall. I think she can hear me. Vicky, I think you're there with some delegates, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I mean, the standing ovations, well, I lost count after a while, but obviously incredibly noisy and a great reception in the hall. Let's find out what people thought about it. You were in there. What did you think of the speech?
It was really charismatic. He touched on everything that people wanted to hear. He said what people wanted to hear, and people were pleased to hear it, because once he said it, he will have to stand by his word.
And ready for a general election?
Oh, yes, I think everybody's ready for a general election. And that's what he said. If we don't get a proper exit from Brexit, he will demand a general election. And I think most Labour Party members are ready for it. Most CLPs are already working towards it.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's find out over here. What did you make of this speech by Jeremy Corbyn? You're live on BBC News.
I thought it was wonderful.
What you wanted to hear?
Yes.
Yep. Tell me what you thought of the speech. Did you like it?
It was a fantastic speech. Great new stuff in it, and we're really pleased to hear that we're going to recognise the Palestinian state as soon as Labour gets into power.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Just tell me, what did you think of the speech you just heard from Jeremy Corbyn?
Very good, thank you, yes.
What did you like about it particularly?
I liked his comments on Palestine and being able to recognise Palestine as a state, and just generally all of it, thank you.
Okay, what did you make of his speech?
It was brilliant, it was inspiring, he's ready for number 10. Labour is going to take over. We're going to build equity, an egalitarian society whereby equity prevails. Yes, Jeremy Corbyn, go on. Theresa May, get out of there. Get out of this seat.
I think we've got the picture. We've got the picture. I'm glad you enjoyed it. What did you make of it?
Phenomenal speech, and it just shows that we need radical change and a general election. So fingers crossed, Theresa May.
You know what some people are going to say? How's he going to pay for all these things he's offering?
How's he going to pay for all these things? Well, the manifesto will surely show that. We had that last time, and all the funds have come together, but it's finally time for the richest to pay their fair share, and we can actually get real change.
Okay, what did you make of what he had to say?
I think this inequality is unsustainable. I think that the rich should be paying for the poor, the homeless, our future generations. I thought it was a fantastic speech, bringing the party together. Don't report us as divided, we are together. And we will win.
Okay,
we'll get
there we go. So a message of unity here, obviously. As you would expect, they completely loved it.
Vicky, thank you very much. Well, the delegates enjoyed it. Let's put some of these questions to John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor. He's now with us here. Jeremy Corbyn's just finished. that speech. We said he looked very comfortable. He says you're ready for government. Do you expect to be in power this time next year?
I wouldn't be surprised. Don't take anything for granted, but I wouldn't be surprised because the Tories are in such disarray.
How will it happen?
I think it's most probably that the Tories will implode, whether it's over Brexit. The interesting thing is that the Tories hate each other more than they hate us at the moment, so they might well fall apart. So we've got to take that opportunity.
So is it a bit of fingers crossed sort of strategy?
Oh, I've had my fingers crossed since the last general election to get this government out as quickly as possible.
Right, you said they're going to implode over Brexit, but you are now saying, Jeremy Corbyn has stated today, that if Theresa May delivers a deal that meets certain criteria, you'll back her.
Well, that's what we've always said. Keir Starmer...
These 6 tests, they're not the same as these 6 tests.
Oh, they summarise the 6 tests, and Keir Starmer's made that absolutely clear. We're trying to look after the interests of the country, so if she can get a deal which meets those tests and meets the criteria that Jeremy's summarised today, yes, we'll support her, but as Jeremy said, it's highly unlikely.
Right. Does it deliver the exact same benefits as we currently have as members of the single market and the customs union? Do you think Theresa May can get that?
That's the test they set themselves. That was the promise they gave us in Parliament. David Davis and Theresa May was Prime Minister at the time. I don't think they can, because I don't think they can agree amongst themselves on the strategy to do that.
Right, but it implies that if Theresa May were to agree to a customs union, which is what you've been proposing, that would deliver a frictionless border in Northern Ireland.
That's true. And
how does it deliver a frictionless border in Northern Ireland?
Because you'll be able to develop the tariff-free role of that if you have linked that with the single market as well. We've said all the way along, if you can put that package together, it will assist us in resolving the situation. I don't think they can.
Right, but not on its own it won't do it, will it?
No, it's one of the aspects of it. It's the package overall. Look, if a miracle occurs and she comes back with something that will protect jobs in the economy and the package that's set out, we would support it, but it's not going to happen, I don't think.
Right, are you convinced that this is a sort of reaching out olive branch to Theresa May and a deal that Labour can get behind?
I'm not sure. I feel that it's quite fudgy still. I mean, everyone's been fudgy. It's like the Great British Fudge Off right now when it comes to sort of Brexit, to be absolutely honest. And we all have our fudge and eat it. But, you know, look, I feel like the Labour Party leaves Liverpool with a much more coherent Brexit position than we arrived with. And I like the fact that all options are still on the table.
Including remaining in the EU?
Yes, including
but you didn't
remaining.
say that earlier in the week, John. No. You said that wouldn't be an option. It shouldn't be an option.
I was looking at sequentially, respect for the original referendum. Well, we're keeping all options on the table. We don't know what will occur in November when she comes back. My view is I think we can get into government, and as just Jeremy said today, I think we can negotiate a deal which will protect the economy, will protect jobs. I know at the moment I can't see the Tories doing that. We've got the interest of the country at heart, though.
Right. Joel is in the newsroom. He's been beavering away listening to Jeremy Corbyn. Joel, does the offer from Jeremy Corbyn in that speech on Brexit, would it deliver a frictionless border in Northern Ireland, amongst other things?
Exactly, Jay. There was that significant line in Jeremy Corbyn's speech where he said that if the government were to have a deal which stayed in a customs union and had no hard border, then the Labour Party could support it. And yeah, we've been thinking about whether Labour's plan, which is to, as I say, have a customs union with the EU, but to not be a member of the single market or the EEA like Norway, would indeed deliver no hard border. I called the European Commission, and they reminded me of something that Michel Barnier said back in March, which is this. This is what he said. It should be well understood that, even in a customs union, a country which is outside the single market always faces border checks to ensure compliance with European standards. This is the case, for instance, with Turkey. Now, he's mentioning Turkey because Turkey is an example of a country that is in a customs union arrangement with the EU, but not in the single market. And it's been well reported that there are extensive checks on the border between Turkey and Bulgaria, even though Bulgaria is an EU member state. But it's worth remembering as well what Keir Starmer said yesterday. He reiterated the Labour policy that they would also like a strong single market deal with the EU. What we don't know, of course, is exactly what that means and whether that plus a customs union would deliver no hard border, and also whether the EU would accept that proposal.
Joel, thank you very much. Well, John, respond to that. A country outside the single market would face border checks.
That's exactly what we've been saying time and time again. A customs union and a strong relationship with the single market. We believe we can negotiate that. We don't believe the Conservatives can.
Right, why? What difference is it going to make when Jeremy Corbyn goes to see Michel Barnier? The same rules will apply.
I tell you, I think because as soon as we get into those negotiations, the atmosphere will change dramatically. I think we've always worked on the basis of constructive engagement, mutual respect, mutual interest. And I think I think the Tories should moved to one side and give us a try.
How would you vote in a future referendum if remaining in the EU was somehow an option?
Well, I campaigned for Remain, but we'll see the circumstances at the time.
Right, you can't say now?
Well, I want to get us into government, negotiate a deal, and be able then, I think, in government, be able to protect jobs and the economy. I don't think anyone else is capable of doing that. I think we can.
Right, but you can't say now. I know a lot of things would have to happen, as Labour politicians have said, but if there were to be a referendum, it could be quite soon, another one, would you vote to remain or leave?
We'll take our decisions as the issues arise. The first issue for me is getting into government and negotiating the deal, full stop.
Let's talk about some of your policies from earlier in the week. I mean, in your own speech, you outlined loads of proposals for restructuring the British economy. The headline measure was to take 10% of shares in companies over 250 workers for workers. But actually, it's a smash and grab for the Treasury, because anything over a £500 dividend you would take.
Well, first of all, it's 1% a year over a 10-year period. So it's a gradual build-up of basically the ability of workers themselves to share in the wealth that they create within a company. And this is nothing untoward. It happens across Europe. Worker-employee shares, ownership schemes, or even in this country. But we want to make sure everyone participates in that in the larger companies. When it reaches a certain level, because the state provides the resources, the basic fabric in which profits can be made by these companies, we'd like a social dividend to cover some of that
Right, so the state is going to take a fairly large amount of money.
It will pay for hospitals and education and training, and yes, some of the social security when people are sick.
But you can see why businesses would say that is a smash and grab from us directly to the state, not just to workers.
I think what they'll get out of that, first of all the evidence shows employee ownership schemes provide a more productive company and a more stable company. In addition to that, the investment within the local community and society will help them grow their business.
Right, but if it's really about workers' ownership, why don't you just give them more than £500 dividend each?
Because we believe there should be a balance between what the workers themselves share and also the social dividend for everybody, because actually everyone contributes towards the profits of individual companies.
How many companies do you think will avoid this, will delist from the stock exchange so they don't have to pay those dividends?
Well, we'll go out and consult them now. We'll open up, we'll open up the books to them, and I think once they see what our proposals are, they'll be reassured, because most of them, I think, actually want a stable company which is looking to the long term and which their employees are working productively.
Right, but you can't force these companies to do so in that sense if they decide to up sticks and go somewhere else.
Look, we have a market. We have a huge market that these companies profit from. On that basis, they gain significant benefits from being located here and operating here. And as a result of that, I can't see companies up sticks. They're here because they sell goods to our people and make goods here as well.
Right, but I mean, when you look at foreign-owned companies, I mean, they'd be exempt too, wouldn't they? I mean, how many workers are we actually talking about being able to get these dividends?
11.5 million.
Right, with all the exemptions?
11.5 million, and in fact, I think that's a lower estimate actually, but 11.5 million.
Right, how would you stop big companies just basing themselves in another jurisdiction?
Look, at the moment, what would happen, they would need to operate in this country to sell their goods and provide the services there and make their profits. But that's why they're located here. And if they have an operation here, they will be part of this scheme.
I actually really like the proposal, and I think sort of giving workers just more of a voice, more of a stake in a company is very, very good. As to your point about whether businesses would leave, some of them are leaving because of Brexit anyway, remember.
But I don't think this is a factor. I think that's Brexit, and we can solve the Brexit problem for them when we go into government and reassure them.
Well, hopefully, John, the Labour Party, which you'll be a huge part of leading in Downing Street, will... If Brexit looks like it's going to completely harm the economy, I hope you will stop it.
Well, the options are all there.
But the IOD, Institute of Directors, has called your plans, they've called them draconian. The CBI says it could convince investors to pack their bags. You sit here and say you'll convince businesses, well, not on the record so far.
Look, with the greatest respect, that's what I expect them to say initially.
Right.
But
What, you think you're going to convince them to change their minds?
I think, look, what I always say to them, this is what we're going to do. Some things you'll like, some things you won't. Most of it you will like because it's about investment and growing the economy. You'll be able to get a decent rate of return, but actually we expect you to share some of those profits with your workers. I think that's completely reasonable.
Right, you want to transform the British economy in a fairly short period of time. We spoke about this earlier in the week. So what happens in week 1 of John McDonnell in number 11? What are your first instructions to the Treasury?
What we're doing at the moment, the first instructions to the Treasury is we're rewriting the Green Book, first of all. We're doing that now. Hope to publish our redraft by Christmas. We'll be able to hand them a Green Book which will define for them the criteria upon which they'll make their investments. And their criteria will largely be about raising productivity, making sure that actually we tackle climate change and making sure there's we end the regional disparity in investment, and we look to tackle our problems with regard to investment in the fourth industrial revolution, automation, AI and all the rest. That's not actually happening on the scale we need. And we'll be able to hand them that and say, these are the criteria we'll use for our decisions, and then that will influence other departmental decisions as well.
One Labour MP suggested if there isn't a general election that you would hope to win, there should be a general strike. Is that the sort of policy you'd back?
It's not Labour Party policy. I can understand how people are quite angry about the situation at the moment and looking for different means. I think this government is going to fall apart anyway. We'll have a general election, get into government, I think with a decent majority as well. And in the first 5 years, I think we'll be able to transform our society in such a way that we'll be able to transform people's lives.
But the Treasury that you're going to work with, you're going to direct them, push through the policies that you want to do. Has that same Treasury been to blame for enabling the financial culture you say led to the crash?
I think they've not been sufficiently interventionist in terms of regulation. I don't think the management of the economy overall has been particularly effective for quite a period of time. And what we're doing now is every fortnight my Treasury team meets. Bob Kersley, used to be head of the civil service, comes in. We go through an exercise in which we're looking at all the issues we'll have to confront when we go into government. We're bringing in some ex-Treasury civil servants, and we're looking at our past ministers as well, bringing external advice too from the private sector and elsewhere, and preparing for government. That detailed exercise that we're going through now will enable us to hit the deck running when we go in.
Are you as worried about the deep state that Jeremy Corbyn's advisor, Andrew Murray, talked about, preventing Jeremy Corbyn being able to do what he wants to do?
I think when the deep state sees what we're going to do and make a prosperous society more equal, they'll be on side straight away.
Oh, yeah. What did you think when you heard those comments?
What?
What did you think when you heard those comments?
I enjoyed A Very British Coup as a novel.
Let's go back to that second referendum, because you're still not quite prepared to say one way how you'd vote, and I don't see what's going to change.
Let me be clear.
And I think people would like clarity.
Okay. I campaigned for Remain. I wanted to remain. We lost that, so my view is we have to respect that decision, try and negotiate the best deal we possibly can. If the government can't do that, or if we can't achieve that, we have to then have a decision made, and we've kept all the options on the table how that will happen.
John, we actually did a panel together, didn't we? Look, come on, look, the thing that we like about you and Jeremy Corbyn is you say it how it is, you don't triangulate, you don't fudge your way around. Yeah. Imagine a situation, it's all gone terrible, we are having that second vote. I know you wanted a general election, we haven't got it. Well, how would you vote? I mean, I'd vote to remain.
Look, this will be sequenced. And we need to work the sequences through.
I think you've been saved by the clock. That's all we've got time for here at the Labour Party conference on leader speech, with still no answer from John McDonnell.